Seven, six, five, four, three, two, one.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
Hey everybody, thanks for hopping over here. I know hopefully some of you have followed us over from our podcast, Color of Magic, actually, and welcome to the Nightcap. This is kind of a light free form kind of follow up to our podcast. Like I said, this is very shoddily put together, but I want these to be kind of the quick instant thoughts coming from my little mini studios you can see behind me with my green screen and other thing happening. This is for episode 3, which we covered kind of the purpose as to why we still need efforts like what we're doing with Color of Magic in the gaming community, but in particular the Magic community. On this episode, we read a letter that was sent to a game store that really hit on just about everything we don't want of a person in our game spaces. And it's one of those things, like when we read it, we were actually trying not to get too emotional about it because it's very much a topic that's very personal for a lot of people. But I recommend you go back and listen to the episode, but it's a pretty deep letter where somebody felt entitled enough to write to this game store and talk about, they didn't appreciate the feminism. They didn't like that there were kids around. They felt they were marketing to people that were too poor and didn't have money. That the true market in the industry is actually straight white males. I think that was mentioned in there. And the point we were getting at is just that these people still exist. And these are, when you hear about people trying to get people out of the game community, it's only people like that. Like, it's not about removing everybody that's there now that's not a person of color or that's not, a woman or not gay or transgender or any of that stuff. Like, it's literally about just raising all those other groups up to be included so they understand they're welcome and get rid of knuckleheads like the person who wrote the letter. From a personal perspective, I have to tell you, like, I've been in the business for a while. At this point, I've been on the business side of the industry for 20 plus years. And I've seen people like this. I've had them walk in my store. I've had people walk up, look at my business, be impressed, and then look me dead in the eye and say, this is a pretty well-run game store for being a black-owned business. That's crazy. Like, what does that even mean? Like, is the expectation that somebody of color, or particularly a black person, can't run a decent business? I've been accused of my business, likely only existing because I'm trying to deal drugs out of it. That, like, I wouldn't actually be interested in games. That I'm not a nerd like everybody else coming into my store. Like, these are real things that happen. This isn't me just saying it. Like, I have so many things over the course of these discussions and this podcast that I will go into. It's like I mentioned on this week's episode. Like, I will have some things that probably will be barely PG-13 because of some things that were said to me that I will quote and have on these talks. And my point being is that these people still exist. Like, these are people that believe that somebody in one of the minority groups or underrepresented or disenfranchised groups doesn't totally belong in the space. Or that if they do, only in certain contexts. And anything different is odd and doesn't make sense. Like, that's what makes this hard. When we're trying to lift people up, particularly through our podcasts, is create exposure for these people. Because what I think a lot of people don't understand is that when people like this exist, they come and make those comments and say those things, it just creates a very uncomfortable situation for these other groups to want to participate. Some are interested and they will never go into a game store or an event for that matter, because of that attitude or that situation they may have to deal with. We also talked about when you go to a game convention, you can go to a panel that's got 8 to 10 people on it. Writers, artists, directors, creative minds of all types. And there may be no person of color on that panel. Sometimes not even a woman on that panel. That makes it hard for people in these other groups to feel, I don't want to say that you just don't care, but like that the thing you're doing is simply not going to speak to them, not going to cater to them, that they won't be able to find something they relate to in your product. If you're putting out a board game, D&D book, or adventure module, whatever, what is attracting them to it that they can relate to? I mean, as an exercise, I took somebody through a game store one day and I said, look at the covers of all of these games. And at that point in time, so few of them had somebody that was non-white on the cover. I said, well, if you didn't know better, you would walk through and assume that, well, a lot of people of color don't play many of these games. It's obviously not true, but I could see how somebody could make that assumption. Or maybe that the industry isn't welcoming. Also not totally true, but it is difficult. There are hurdles. There are times that I know people of color that have worked on projects and they themselves have questioned if it's actually going to hurt their sales to put a person of color prominently displayed on the cover or panel or whatever it is of what they're doing, or the ad they're putting together or whatever. Like, if that's going to hurt their sales because they're representing a person of color on it. That's kind of the world you're in. That's what we're trying to change. None of this is about pushing somebody out. This isn't about saying, oh, we got to get rid of all the white people that are here or all the males that are here. Like, obviously, that's not what we want. But it's finding room for these people, and not just room, finding a way, a path for people of color to be represented, because they're having to deal with all these idiotic hardships for no reason at all. And I'm not going to sit here and say, like, woe is me or whatever. Like, I came up through the game industry. I ran a business. Like I said, I've written stuff. I've run events. I've run a convention. I've done a little bit of everything. So yes, it can be done. And yes, it can happen. But I can tell you with every single one of those things, there was some hurdle. There was some people pushing back. There were some people that didn't want to participate or support it, largely because of the color of my skin. Sorry, it's one of those things that gets a little bit frustrating when you think about it, because I know I'm working just as hard. I know I'm putting as much time in. I'm doing as much research. I'm getting as many guests. I'm doing all these things. And yet you still have that hurdle that you have to push harder, that you have to try harder, that you have to do more. For no particular reason at all. Like, that's so tough. Like, I have been at industry events where I have been effectively the only black person in the room, and then still had people like questioning my expertise. When I had tons of references, where I had people who would say like, oh no, DeQuan particularly helped me out with my store. He's done this thing or done that thing. Like, I would get more pushback. And if that happened to me, with the amount of experience I had, the amount of connection I had, the groups I've started, I like to think I've had a positive impact on the industry in a lot of ways for a lot of stores, a lot of events, different games. If that can happen to me, what do you think's going to happen to a person who's new and trying to push a new idea on a deck to become a writer on a website or board game they want to create or anything for that matter? And interestingly, when I was at Wizards, one of the things we did is we spoke at a convention in Atlanta, and we were talking about diversity in games and representation. And we had a panel. It was me, an Asian gentleman, a bisexual female, and a cis white guy. And there were people who questioned when we put the panel together. It was all voluntary, who wanted to speak. And they asked, why did we even want a cis white guy on the panel? And part of it was so he could give his perspective too, of like, he said outright, like, he understood that there are things he got to do and things he wasn't questioned on and things were available to him that wasn't to the rest of us for various reasons. And I think that was just as valid to show that he also understands that there wasn't space and opportunity for some of these other people. Now, I'm not saying that wasn't the case at Wizards of the Coast. Wizards has done a great job of trying to hire people of all different types and make those views more heard, more available, and even just diversify their staff. So I'm not putting this on them. But I'm saying the fact that we even got asked was interesting because that kind of says the way people are viewing some of the situations. It's an all or none or thing, and it's not it at all. It's like we want all of these people to coexist. There's a lot of smart people in all these different groups, and the game's only going to be better if they're all able to exist, have their thoughts heard, and be represented on some level. But yeah, to have somebody so entitled that they believe, well, one, that they took the time to write this business and tell the business how terrible they are and how they're likely to go out of business because they're not doing all the things that speak to them particularly. Not being able to see the fact that, the fact that they have a more diverse customer group and not everybody is some, high society rich person, that they're reaching more communities. The fact that they had stuff going on in this particular store for kids meant that in the future there's going to be more gamers. That they had women working at their store meant that they were probably going to appeal to a larger customer base. I mean, that's 50% of the population that now that perspective is represented in the store. And there's going to be things that matter to them, the way displays are laid out, or what products are carried. But none of the stuff that appeals to the people that exist has to go away. I mean, we might make room for some other things, but all the games you like are still going to be around. Now, this particular Grognard was like not interested in anything new. So, I mean, he didn't like new D&D and whatever. Like, he calls all that out. But it's just the fact of the matter. Like, there are a lot of strong efforts out there. And even speaking with other people of color, some of them just don't feel confident even going and speaking to anybody and trying to get themselves out there. So, I mean, I moved it. I don't have it sitting in front of me anymore, but I have a list of like 50 people, groups, and personalities on social media, Twitter, whatever, that were recommended to me to have on the show. And the ones I've already researched and reached out to, they're 100% on board because, like, man, I'd love to be on the show. Finally, a space where, like, people to get it, or I can express something and know it's not going to be weird to the people I'm talking to. So just offering that space and that opportunity for those people is important. Like, but it's not for them to come on and just bash somebody else and just say, oh, this is better and this person's awful or this group's whatever. Like, that's not the point. It's strictly to say this person exists. They have some awesome ideas. They're doing some good efforts, and get them some exposure in some ways they may not get otherwise. And, right now our show's not huge, right? We're getting 100 some, close to 200 downloads now per episode, probably by the time you listen to this. So it's not huge, but for, what? In 3 weeks' time, that's not bad. But it tells us that this is the thing that's needed. This is the thing people want. And our feedback's been great. So I'm hoping that some point we look back on this particular episode, 6 months from now, hopefully when we're getting 1,000 downloads an episode, and just see like how important this type of effort is. And I don't think we're it. I mean, I think we need other efforts. I think we need, people when you're putting together those panels for conventions, look particularly for the writer that's just a person of color and have them on there. Have 2 or 3. Have your panel be at least 30-40% people of color so those views are represented, so they can give a different perspective on a conversation. And just get people thinking. Because ultimately, think about it like this. The more people we have coming into our circles, into our communities, the more money our stores can make, the more money the games can make, the more people to come out and support the things, the more sponsors we can get as individuals if you're a competitive player. Like, the more people you involve, the more opportunity there is for everybody. But you have to invite all those people in. We have to shut off the knuckleheads. We have to push those people out. And, for every one of those people that doesn't understand that, because you hadn't seen a black person before who was into gaming, because your social circles just didn't have that. Or I don't know, maybe it's Mexican, Asian, whatever. Doesn't mean that they don't exist. And when you encounter it, that doesn't mean to push them away. That should be your opportunity to say, oh, cool, I didn't know this was a thing. Awesome. Now there's more people you can game with. Take a chance to learn what brought them in. Why were they interested? It's a chance to make a connection and a friend or whatever. But yeah, all of this is about getting exposure and growing the community, getting more people interested, bringing more people into the fold. And like I said, just cutting out these knuckleheads. Like, having people like that just want to keep everything exactly the same. They don't want to reach out. They don't want to expand the community. They don't want to expand customer bases. And honestly, if I'm just being honest, they don't understand business. But they have some of the biggest mouths and some of the biggest opinions. But anyway, yeah, that's really it this week. It's just about none of this, of our efforts especially, are about getting rid of anybody except for these very particular knuckleheads. Like, we're not, and I'm using the term knucklehead because I'm trying to be PC here. There's some things I really want to say and call this person, but I'm not. But the goal is just get rid of those people. Keep everybody else. Like, I have tons of white friends. I have tons of gamer friends of all different types, all different varieties, all different representations. Don't want to shove any of them away. But for every person I know, I want them to feel comfortable being involved in an event I'm in. I want them to feel comfortable pitching a new book idea. I want them to feel comfortable showing off some new art or going to apply for a thing in the industry or putting their name in the hat to go be a speaker or whatever it is that they're doing that's related to our game or games. I want them to be comfortable doing that. But we have to make the right steps to get there. What we're doing now is a good start. I think seeing the support that we've gotten and the comments we've gotten really show that it matters to people. And I want to be clear, like, it's not just people of color that are reaching out to us. There are a bunch of white people I've seen that have shared it and said, man, this is important. It's cool somebody's doing this thing. Like, they've sent direct messages saying, man, I appreciate what you're doing. We've had messages to our website saying, I don't even know if I'm the right demographic you're targeting, but I love the show and this is important that somebody's covering it. Or like, hey, I'm learning so much through this. And that's exactly what we want to do. This is what we're all about. But we need more of these efforts. So if you've got something you're thinking about doing, yeah, go for it. And hell, if it's promoting people of color, like, let me know. Get on the show. Like, we'll gladly share somebody's efforts and help promote those things. I think it's all very important. And I think it's the type of things that we don't talk about enough in the game industry, probably. Actually, I know we don't. Because there's a lot of people that just think, well, we're gaming and we're having a good time, and that's not really happening around us. But it is every day, I promise you. Like, this letter that the store got in Fort Collins, Colorado was not unique. It was just one of the, I can tell you, it would, like, it's sad that most of the store owners who saw it weren't even that surprised that they saw it. Like, that says a lot. But the reality is, it happened. And this store owner didn't know how to deal with it, so he was reaching out to others. The good news is, everybody was like, hey, this happens, not a big deal. This person's probably not coming back. Your store's doing all the right things. He obviously called out all that stuff, and he doesn't like it. So good, you got rid of him. And that says a lot, too, that all the owners are on board. They all understand. Like, they're making all the efforts that need to be made. So, anyway, that's it for this week. If you haven't checked it out, please go give episode 3 a look. And hopefully you're listening to our podcast. We are available on Podbean, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google, Spotify, select episodes on Soundcloud. I mean, we're all over the place. So definitely give us a look. If you are so obliged, go give us some love on Patreon, patreon.com/Color of Magic. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook under Color of Magic. And if nothing else, check out our podcast and just share it with your friends. Like, even that is enough to just help spread the word and help with some of our efforts. But yeah, appreciate you listening. It's cool. Thanks for coming for the nightcap and listening to a rant this week. And hopefully we will see you next week.